Hi, I'm Tony.
I'm Patrick.
I want to welcome you back again to Cave to the Cross Apologetics, and we're working our way through Greg Koukl's book, Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions, right? And so he's trying to help us to work through discussions and answering questions and how do we deal with specific situations, right? So this is a tactical approach, not a broad approach where we look at a worldview and that sort of thing, right? And so he wants us to be able to answer questions, deal with issues in a gracious and tactful way. Right.
And set up a conversation that best helps us to move in the direction that we want the conversation to go. Yeah.
So we have looked at a couple of questions that he calls Colombo, right? What do you mean by that, right? So when a person makes a statement, we can ask for clarification, right? And that way they have to explain more. Oftentimes people, give cliches and all those types of things, and they really don't know what they mean, right? And so this is an opportunity for them to clarify or you to help them clarify where they're coming from, right? So what do you mean by that? And then the second Columbo question, he says, is how did you come to that conclusion, right? And so again, you're asking the person to give reasons for why they believe what they believe, right? Which is if they make a claim, it's their responsibility to defend it, right? And so you want to make sure that, that you do that. Notice, again, you're trying to clarify things and help them to work through these particular issues because you're trying to share the gospel with them and help them to understand the gospel and that sort of thing. The last chapter that we looked at is he talked about rescues, right? And he talked about the professor's ploy and getting out of the hot seat, right? So what happens when you're asking the Columbo question and the professor, that is the person in authority, the person with the microphone, right, who's in control, what if they attempt to turn the tables on you, right? And they, instead of answering your questions, they tell you, okay, well, you seem to be a fundamentalist Christian, who thinks the Bible is the inspired word of God, every jot and tittle. I'm a fair man. We have a little extra time. Why don't you stand up and explain to the rest of the class why you believe what you believe, right? Well, what a great opportunity, you might think, right? The problem is that the professor can shoot you down at any moment, right? And so you don't want to get yourself in that situation. Notice, here you are on the defensive, even though you haven't made any claim. Right.
You've just asked for clarifying. Clarification.
Yeah. And so what you do is now you may later on want to defend what you believe, but you just kind of turn the tables back on the professor, right? I'm a student. I'm just asking you a question and trying to get some information, right? That sort of thing. So that's the professor's ploy where they attempt to turn the tables on you. The other one was getting out of the hot seat. And this one here, he suggests you use an Aikido move and use the person's momentum against them, right? When they ask certain questions that are out of your depth. In other words, you don't know, they have more information and that sort of thing. And really what you do here is just say, that's really interesting. I haven't studied that a whole lot. Why don't you tell me, what you're talking about here, and I'll consider it and maybe come back later and we can discuss it, right? So now, you're out of the hot seat, right? So the issue here is to be in control of your side of the conversation, right? You're in control of your side of the conversation. And so someone can't make you say something, right? Or respond to something in a certain way if you don't want to do that.
Yeah,
right?
or you can't respond because you don't know as much as they do.
Right. And so, the magic words are let me think about it. Maybe we can talk about it more later.
Yeah.
right? Now you're off the hook, especially if you're in over your head and you don't know what's going on, or you're confused, or they know more than you do, and that sort of thing. And then you allow them to explain their position, and you could get an education in this particular situation, right? All right. So we've looked at these two Columbo questions. We've looked at what to do when we're in the hot seat and that sort of thing. Now what he wants to talk about in Chapter 7 is this third Columbo question, right? And the idea here is using questions to make a point. Using questions to make a point, right? That's his Chapter 7. The third use of Columbo takes us more on the offensive, yet in an inoffensive way. We ask a different kind of question, he says, sometimes called, notice, a leading question, right? So we ask a leading question. And so as the name suggests, leading questions take the other person in the direction that you want them to go. Right.
And so sometimes your goal will be to defeat what you think is a bad argument or a flawed point of view. And so asking these questions can help kind of move you to the next point that you have to do. And so instead of saying, whoa, hold on, that's a bad point. Let me give you my 3-point reason of why that is. Asking these leading questions is a offensive, inoffensive term, a way to do that. So you're saying, as we'll get on here, kind of, have you considered this? And so you're bringing up a point while still asking a question. Again, that's what Lieutenant Colombo does when he's trying to trap the murder suspect. Not that we're saying that the person on the other side is the murderer. But if you've hated your brother, then you've committed murder. So, we're probably all murderers. We're probably all murderers there. And so we're utilizing the Columbo tactic to ask these questions to kind of reveal themselves of what they believe and where they might be falling into, because the murderer has a story, and so you're asking these questions so that they'll reveal the flaws, and they'll have to fall down into their confession, and it makes the story way better. So sometimes you'll want to defeat a bad argument or a flawed point of view, or you may want to use questions to indirectly explain or advance your own ideas. So you're going to be utilizing these.
So you're leading the discussion, right? It's a leading question because you're trying to get them somewhere with this particular question.
I think one thing that he talks about here is kind of think of yourself as a lawyer as well, not just a detective. But a lawyer can't advance their own ideas. It's an objection, leading the witness, right? But here you're doing it for a purpose, and you're not in a court of law.
So you'd have to think of yourself as a bad lawyer, right? You're leading the witness. Well, that's what I'm trying to do.
Right. And I would think that all lawyers, if you're asking a question, you kind of know the answer that you want to get them towards. And so that's the whole point of your
And boy, do I want to go into some lawyer jokes, but I'll...
right. Well, we're philosophers around here. So sometimes you'll set up the terms of conversation using questions to put you in a more beneficial position for your next move. So again, this isn't just, they've said this is the magic word, now pounce on it, destroyed, sunglasses come down, thug life, the Ben Shapiro theme plays or whatever it might be, and, you're out. Well, that's not the conversation you want to have. You're wanting to have a legitimate conversation with somebody using questions to kind of be this offensive, inoffensive person that Lieutenant Colombo was. And you're hopefully going to have a gospel discussion that's meaty, hearty, it's good for you. And hopefully you'll be able to present a gospel presentation, or at the very minimal, put a pebble in their shoe. And so this might be a pebble pudding ploy.
And so, so what do we do in these situations, right? He says that Columbo can also help us get out of a different kind of tough situation. Sometimes we need to use questions to set up the conversation in a way that is most favorable to us, right? So, let's say you have a boss who's a lesbian, and they ask you, this is your boss, what do you think about homosexuality?
Yeah.
Whoa, right?
Okay, now.
Right? And so he says, if you're placed in a situation where you suspect your convictions will be labeled intolerant, bigoted, narrow-minded, judgmental, he says use the Columbo tactic to turn the tables on them.
Right.
Right?
Right. So it could be something along the lines of saying something like, this is actually a very personal question. You're asking, and I don't mind answering, because we should always be ready to give an answer for the hope that we have, and this involves it, and especially if you're this outspoken Christian that people know, and so you want to ask, I don't mind answering, but before I do, I want to know if it's safe to offer my views. And in this day and age, that's a very important question to ask. Yeah. So let me ask you a question. Do you consider yourself a tolerant person or an intolerant person on issues like this? Is it safe to give my opinion, or are you going to judge me for my point of view? Do you respect diverse points of view, or do you condemn others for convictions that differ from your own? And these are important because theoretically, this is what the other person is going to espouse. So if you just came in and said, oh yes, lesbianism, homosexuality is an abomination unto the Lord, 1 Corinthians tells us, and so such were some of you, so you can be saved from your homosexuality, just as people were and are and continuing on if you accept the Lord Jesus Christ as your Savior.
And then you're accused of hate speech and you lose your job.
Right. Yeah. Or bigotry. And so what you're doing is hopefully utilizing kind of their worldview against them, or you're at least wanting to posit the claim to them that you're asking for tolerance here, you're asking for diverse opinion, that you respect people that don't hold the same values of you, and that who are you to judge? Those are kind of the big three key for this type of conversation. So you're putting those questions to lead them to hopefully giving you a position to answer that question to the best of your ability.
Right. So the direction leading them here is to be tolerant with your answer.
Right.
Right. That's the direction that you're trying to lead them. So you're asking them, are they tolerant or are they intolerant? Right. And so you are, of course, most people will want to be tolerant, right?
Yeah.
And so you've led them into that direction. So now when you give the answer, they really can't, name call and accuse you of all these various things. And again, the problem with being called intolerant or bigoted or all of these various judgmental, narrow-minded, is that usually these things are conversation stoppers, right? And if a person thinks that you're any of these types of things, they really dismiss what you have to say. It's almost as if they put up blinders, right? And so you don't want that. You want them to be open to what you have to say.
Right. And still utilizing the Colombo questions of what do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? The initial question of what do you think about homosexuality? The clarifying question of what do you mean by that could be, well, I'm just talking about in the scope of this role here in job. So instead of launching into a gospel presentation, your boss is talking about a work issue, and so she's phrased it wrong or incorrectly, and so you're trying to ask a clarifying question, and you're leading that person to kind of clarify themselves here. So when you give your point of view, it's going to be very difficult for anyone to call you intolerant because you've set up these questions of, are you a compassionate person? Do you actually want to hear diverse opinions? And hopefully they'll agree to that, and you'll kind of prime the pump so that if they call you bigoted, it's like, whoa, hold on, I thought you said this was safe to answer, that I'm able to give my opinion, that you like diverse opinions. Here I'm diverse opinion from what you expect. If you just want me to parrot you, I mean, you're paying me, so I guess I could say a number of things as long as it doesn't cross my conviction. But yeah, hopefully this leading question will kind of prime the pump a bit.
And you should get them to answer it, right?
Right, yeah.
Do you respect diverse opinions? Are you tolerant or intolerant? And you want an answer from them, right? And so you want them to commit to a particular position, right? That they're like this. Yeah. Now, what happens, though, if they beat you to the punch, right? And you've already been labeled intolerant by someone, right? Well, Colombo.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
This is starting to sound familiar.
Yeah. So if they say, well, it's clear you think you're right and everyone else, who disagrees with you is wrong, then you need to point out with questions that they're doing, notice, the very same thing that they're accusing you of doing.
Sounds like an internal critique. I love the internal critique. Thank you, Nancy Piercy.
So what do you mean by this, right? And then you get them to lay out their clarification of it. And oftentimes they're doing exactly what they're accusing you of doing.
Right. You're being intolerant and bigoted. I'm scared of that. Okay. Well, you're doing that thing that you said I shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you, the question of, I guess I do think my views are correct. It's always possible I could be mistaken, but in this case, I don't think I am. The person responds, but what about you? You seem to be, or I'm sorry, that's your boss.
Yeah.
And then your response is, but what about you? You seem to be disagreeing with me. Do you think your own views are right? Are they correct? Well, yes, I think I'm right too, but I'm not intolerant. You are. Okay, that's the part that confuses me. Why is it when I think I'm right, I'm intolerant, but when you think you're right, you're just right? What am I missing here? Ken, you're asking, those Columbo questions here, and hopefully diffusing it. You're pointing out exactly where you're wanting to lead this discussion, which is they're being inconsistent, that they're asking from you what they don't expect of themselves. And no one likes hypocrites here, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's those Christians are the only hypocrites in town.
Yeah. And so they don't want to be one, right? Right? Sometimes the best way to disagree with someone is not to face the issue head on, but to soften the challenge by using an indirect question, right? A leading question. So you can cushion this third Columbo approach in a couple of ways. For one, think about using the phrase, have you considered, to introduce your concern? Then offering a different view that gently questions the person's belief or confronts a weakness with, in their argument.
Yeah.
So notice you're being soft, you're being gracious. Have you considered? You're not, being obnoxious and confrontational and that sort of thing.
Right.
You're wrong.
Yeah.
Right?
This is my opinion, and this is what we're going to do here.
Have you considered? Right.
And you're able to kind of posit it with, well, other people have said this. I mean, the press is the corporate press is always liking. Putting questions on the end of things is some people say this. Well, just, utilize that, co-opt it. Some people say that, homosexuality is wrong and the Bible talks about it. And if there is God, then, wouldn't we expect him to kind of talk on this or wherever you might want to lead that conversation?
Exactly. And so this, again, is a leading question, right? Have you considered, and then you give them the leading question.
Right. Another way to kind of soften this challenge is to phrase your concern as a request for clarification. And again, this isn't being disingenuous. This is a perfect opportunity. If you've misconstrued this person's motives or understanding, or you kind of got both your wires crossed, asking the beginning question of, can you clear this up for me? Or can you help me understand this? And so you're going to ask the follow-up question to that. And again, you're phrasing it as a question, so they still have the burden of proof on their side, and you're leading them down this path of where you want to take them. So then once they've cleared up, helped you understand it, then you offer your objection in a way that gently challenges the belief or confronts the weakness, because you know where they're going with it.
Yeah, good. And so so this is the third Columbo question, this leading issue, right? And we do it with gentleness and graciousness and that sort of thing. And we want to make sure that the person understands where they're coming from, clarifies, their particular position, and help them to understand where we're coming from with this particular tactic.
Right. So that's the end of chapter 7. So we've got our 3 points. We've got, what do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? And now your kind of asking.
Have you considered this?
A leading question.
Yeah.
Have you considered, or can you help me can you help me understand?
Yeah.
This being the case, and
or can you clear this up for me?
Right.
That sort of thing.
Some people say.
Yeah.
So we've got Colombo, and we've got it down, and no more needs to be said from this, right? Okay, chapter 8 is going to help us out a little bit more. Here we're perfecting Colombo, and so what are kind of the skills that we can utilize? Because obviously Greg Koukl is kind of a master at this. Obviously, he came up with a system, so that helps. But he, within chapter 8, he even talks about times where he's kind of fallen over the he's being mobbed by a group of people that all want his attention. He's talking to someone who has conflicting views about something, and he just kind of messes it up. And so he needs to say.
But let me just encourage folks that there's a lot of stories in this book, right? And we could read pages after pages, and we don't want to bore anybody, right? But this is a good book to have because those stories help him illustrate the principles and points that he's trying to make here. Right?
And he uses himself in a lot of these kind of falter points that are important, because he even says that he doesn't know everything and he doesn't have it perfect down. And so it's nice. I always think, workout videos. I always want one person in the workout video who looks like me and is struggling with just absolutely everything. I don't need the super toned bodies. That's something to aspire to, but give me the bumbling fool. I'm there. So in chapter 8, we're talking about perfecting Colombo. We want to perfect any new skill. It takes time and practice, and guess what? This is no issue here. We're going to have to kind of think about it ourselves. Yeah. And so he uses here 1 Peter 3:15 of always be ready to give a defense to everyone who ask you to give an account for the hope that is in you. And we always should include with gentleness and meekness, or gentleness and respect. Mm-hmm. That's what the Colombo does, because it keeps you humble. It keeps you meek, because you're asking questions. You're still advancing where you want to go. You're still clarifying. You're still trying to get that person to the point that you want them to go. But your demeanor is even more in check in that. And so he's talking about be ready to give a defense for everyone who asks. Well, how do we do that?
Yeah. Good question. So he says that, in any encounter that we have with folks, there are two times when the pressure is off, right? The first time is before the conversation begins, right? Right? And the second is when it's over, right? And so he says that, after it's over in this situation, we can think through what has happened, right? He says there are 3 specific things that you can do to ready yourself to respond the next time, right? You can anticipate beforehand what might come up, right? You can reflect afterwards on what took place. And in both cases here, you can practice the responses you think of during these reflective moments, so you'll be prepared for the next opportunity, right? So, you kind of think through, okay, how did I do here? What were the responses? And then come up with better responses, perhaps, that you may come up with or have in this particular thing. So, anticipate what they're going to say ahead of time, right? That's when you're considering these types of things, you really want to think through, if I say this, what will they say? Right. And then if they say that, what can I say? Right. So you want to be able to think through in a way like that, so that you're prepared. You're prepared to answer these questions.
Right. So think about things like you're watching a debate and you're seeing both sides of you. That person has probably done a bunch of research on the topic they're talking about. They've got a presentation. If it's a formal debate, that it doesn't get into the back and forth until later, and so they've come up with their best arguments and their best counter arguments, because they're going up against somebody on the other side. They're not just having a monologue, it's a dialogue. And so you can think of yourself, okay, if I was in that position, what would I have to know, not just to know my own position, but the other position, and even counterclaims to my position and counterclaims to their position. And so you just kind of work through that and figure out, what do I need to know?
Exactly. So, for instance, a few years ago, we studied Richard Dawkins' book, right?
Right.
The God Delusion, because we wanted to know what he had to say and then what we could say regarding what he had to say, right?
Yeah.
We could have an answer.
It's really fun to do that through presuppositionalism, too. You just walk through kind of God Delusion, and instead of just hitting his points, say, I think that there's some presuppositions involved in this. Believe it or not, there is. And then so you can anticipate beforehand what might come up and also do it afterwards.
Yeah.
So, these three I kind of call shower thoughts. You're in the shower and you're like, I can't, that's what I should have said.
Yeah.
And so you kind of, you've had this conversation, especially if you are meeting that person that puts you in the hot seat. And so you're writing stuff down and you're coming up with responses and what you should have said and what you might have said better, or here's where I could have asked a better clarifying question, or instead of the first part of the Columbo Tactic, use the second part. So you're kind of again, sports analogies kind of are not my forte, but you're watching the film, right? For football players do that. They say. Here's what we did. Let's review. Let's go to the tape and see, where I missed the tackle and how he juked me when I should have went right. He went left, and I should have looked at his hips. And so, if that's what they do with sports, or you can do it with chess or whatever you might you're watching. Kind of in your own mind how the events took place. Right. You're looking at areas where you might have lost your cool and went off the Columbo Tactic.
Then you've lost.
Yeah, right. If anyone gets angry, then you've lost. And so, that might be a point where you can come back later and even use it as a point of bringing up, hey, in our last conversation, I didn't really have the best answer for you here, or I didn't respond to you well. Would you mind if we kind of talked about it again, and I promise to be better about it, or I've come up with some new things. So. And then the third case is that you practice the responses that you think about in these for the next opportunity. So it might not be with that person, but it could be with somebody else. And so you kind of are amassing a collection of ideas here. So the no, always be ready. This is how you make yourself ready. Right.
And so then he talks about, he gives us a word on style. Right? Style, yeah. He says there are two basic executions of the Columbo Tactic. So think about, Detective Colombo, right? He says the first kind of execution is the bumbling, stumbling approach of Lieutenant Colombo himself, halting, head scratching, right? Apparently harmless. This tactic should be easy for most of us because that's often how we feel, right? Yeah. And when we're trying to gain a foothold in a particular conversation, the stumbling, bumbling, head-scratching approach, right?
Yeah, the ers and the are taken out for movie magic and not so much in real life.
The second basic style or approach or execution of the Columbo Tactic is more confrontational and aggressive, right? It's the technique, he says, that a lawyer uses in the courtroom, right? So these two approaches now in terms of style he wants to talk to us about, and when and how to use these various approaches, right?
So the style that you adopt in any conversation will depend on your goal. It's not wrong to have the lawyer style versus the bumbling detective. It all depends on kind of what you're facing on the other side. Do you want to persuade the other person, or do you want to refute him, right? So if you're wanting to kind of persuade him, sometimes the best approach is that I'm struggling with this. Can you help me out? I'm working through this. What do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? And there's other points where you're asking these leading questions. Okay, if you believe this about
have you considered this?
There's no such thing as objective morality. Okay, well, if that's the case, then me punching you in the face right now it would be immoral, right? What do you think about this?
Yeah.
And so it just depends on, if you're refuting or persuading. So sometimes my purpose is not to persuade the person I differ with, but to persuade the ones who are listening. You're in listening to one of those good old James White debates, and he'll say, "I'm sorry, are you saying this?" And the person will say, "Yes, that's what I'm saying." He goes, "Okay, I was just asking that question so that the audience would hear that." And so sometimes it's the people that surround you that you're kind of is your legitimate crowd. And so, again, are you going to fly off the handle and be that red-faced Christian that's shouting on college campus, or are you that cool, calm, collective person, hopefully, that is moving the conversation along, and if it gets derailed, it's by the other person. So this is the situation that he faced in debates. He realized that there's little hope in winning my opponent. The audience, though, is generally more open-minded. If I can prove my challenger wrong, I can win many of those who are on the fence, as long as I mind my manners. And I think that's true for a lot. It's one thing to watch a debate and say, okay, I'm rooting for this person. But if you're being objective in that, it's like, oh man, my side really came off really terrible because they were condescending and they yelled a lot. And, the person has been in 122 debates. This person's in their third one. How you approach it, how you lead that person, says a lot about you and what other people are listening to you about.
Right, good. So in this chapter, what we talked about is perfecting Colombo, right? We talked about, working through and questioning ourselves in terms of the other person's position and having a response and that sort of thing. Going back after a conversation and thinking through what was said and then maybe coming up with better responses. And then finally, determining the particular style that we want to have in a particular conversation. Right? Yeah. Sometimes we know that the person that we're talking to, there's no way, it seems anyway, right? Especially in a debate situation, they're gonna, they're not gonna, turn over and have it. But you may be able to talk to the audience, right? And so in those situations, the goal is to refute the person and not persuade the person. By refuting the person, you perhaps are persuading the audience.
Right. The angry professor who's going to sit there and yell in your face about how stupid you are for being a Christian. If you're that cool, calm, collected person, then you might be approached by other people within the audience that said, "Hey, I'm sorry that happened, but, can we start a Bible study?" Or, I wasn't, I wanted to say the things that you did, and boy, you really got, smacked down over that, but it wasn't right what that person was doing. Or hopefully you can kind of utilize the entirety of the surrounding world around you to find areas where you can give the reason for the hope that you have.
Amen.
And so we've gotten the 3 points of Colombo, right? What do you mean by that? How do you come to that conclusion? And the third one is
the leading question. Have you considered this, and then lead them into a particular situation, direction, right?
And then afterwards, you're in the shower on the drive home. You come up with that perfect saying. Oh, if I would have just said this,
write it down.
Yeah, you drive back, and then when someone asks you that again, you kind of have to purse your lips a little bit because they've set the ball on the tee for you to knock it out of the park.
Yeah. So feel free to write it down, to take notes after these encounters and that sort of thing. Yeah. He says he's developed a notebook, right? So that he writes these things down so that he's prepared the next time, or better prepared the next time. Yeah. What a great idea, right?
Yeah. Yep. Especially if it's something in the world going on. And so, we kind of have this thing about morality right now. And so there might be repetitive questions that you're hearing from people, or those kind of bumper sticker mentalities. And so you're like, oh, if I ever come up with that, here's what I'm going to say. Well, great. Take that. There's your initial one. How do you do the Columbo tactic around it? Because especially in the current environment, tempers are flared. And so the bumbling, unassuming detective might help calm the situation. And you're, again, allowing them to shoulder the burden of proof, and so these questions can kind of help mitigate that minefield, if you will. So, Tony, now that we've gotten the three, what if I'm asked, what do you mean by that? Or how did I come to that conclusion? Or have I considered something that I might not have considered?
You mean, what if they turn Colombo on you?
That would be the worst. I don't know how to defend against that. And so, of course, that's what we'll be covering in the next chapter of defending against Colombo.
Yeah.
So, and then we'll defending against Colombo. I'm sure it'll end in some regress somewhere. Turtles all the way down.
That's right.
So again, thank you for watching, sharing, subscribing, listening, watching. The individual clips that we pull out. Hopefully, that's of use to people that kind of need to review a single point more than once, or that gets shared out. That's always appreciative. And also our Patreon supporters, we appreciate you, and keep the lights on and the books coming. So we'll be back next time to kind of finish up a little bit on the Columbo Tactic, and we'll move on to more tactics. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yep. See you next time.